folks who were involved with this. So hi, everybody who is now joining the recording. I'm Ken Bigger. I'm a literacy equity advocate living in Chicago and currently the project lead for the Civic Fluency Project at Greenhouse Innovation. And I'm on a bookshop quest, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So to get back to your question, Lisa, what led me to this? I
Meeting is being
was
recorded.
inclined by my experience. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Um, my experience of working kind of in the in-between spaces in the literacy group, because at the CLA we had organizations that covered everything from learning to read and write to loving to read and write, and that really informed my broader kind of philosophy and approach to um, the work, that it is indeed a kind of ecosystem level challenge. So before we get into the specifics of what kind of launched me on the road trip, so to speak, the context for it is that I am primarily interested in how these bookshops facilitate kind of healthy ecosystems of access to education, information, and literacies within their communities.
Well, and we're really I want to have a whole separate meeting and unpack literacy in all of its forms. But before we get to the journey, do talk about, because a lot of bookshops and a lot of our work is about elevating reading and elevating literacy. And when we were together in Cookeville, you said something that really stuck with me. I think I had known it, but not said it out loud in that way. I often talk about literacy as if it's binary. You are literate or you are not. And you reminded me that it's a continuum and that it's not binary, and that in talking about it in that way, we sometimes um, eh, do a disservice to groups of people. Can you say something about that?
Oh, can I say something about, yeah, yeah, uh, Briar Patch. Yes, literacies are continuums and not binaries. We are all in continuums of literacies upon which we can grow, and I think it is helpful to keep that in mind. While it is surely the case that there is an urgency to providing assistance to those folks who are facing barriers to access to kind of foundational skills in reading and writing, there is not a fundamental distinction of kind in my mind between learning to read and reading to learn. They're fundamentally looking for the tools to access the kind of cultural agency one needs in the community in which one lives. And so in that respect, I think if we can kind of align with that, I think there are some healthy things that follow in terms of how we think about the work, support the work, and about how we create community around it. So yeah, I have any number of TED Talks that I can split off into about that subject. But yeah, I mean, I think was it Isaac Asimov maybe who said education is not something that one can finish. And so I think ways in which we can kind of build that ethos of, we are all lifelong learners, and that piece is something that I think we can resonate with, try to embed in terms of the ethos of the way we do the various kinds of work that we do. And through doing that, I think try to um, reduce the amount of sort of social stratification that often kind of goes along with some of our typical habits of thinking.
I intend to think with you and listen to you long on that. Speaking of lifelong learning, you invested yourself in a journey of learning. Um, and we're all curious, what inspired you to set off on this uh, bookshop visit, being what did Steve call it, the master browser, or the ultimate browser of bookshops. What inspired that or triggered that piece of learning, that learning quest for you?
Yeah, thanks. I'm definitely, going to have Steve be my go-to hype man going forward. Really
I'm
appreciate that.
available. I'm
Yep.
available.
Best of the
Uh,
best.
yep. So with all of my kind of personal and professional background as the context of sort of like the general thing, the immediate prompt for doing this kind of journey around was actually the Chicago Indies did their Independent Bookstore Day crawl in 2024. I'm sure that they may have done it before, but the first time I noticed it was in 2024. I imagine the pandemic sort of impeded their ability to do it prior to that. But I like a good challenge, and I wanted to figure out a way that I could do that crawl. The way that Chicago sets it up is that if you visit 10 stores in a day, you're eligible for a coupon that gives you a 10% discount for the next 12 months at all the participating shops. And if you visit 15 stores in a day, um, you can get a 15% discount at all the participating shops.
Now,
And
is that all bookshops
all the
or different
participating bookshops,
all bookshops? Okay, in
all
the
the
area.
ones that participated in the crawl, right? And so
I just want to be
last year it was
impressed.
55. This year it's going to be 81.
Wow.
And then 2024, so that's Chicago land. So it goes out to Harvey's Tales. Um, I won't get you into the sort of the nuances of how suburbs do and do not identify with the city, but that's another story for another time,
Yeah.
perhaps. Um, but I like a good challenge, and I wanted to see how I could do it. Initially, I was thinking about doing it by bike in 2024, but the predicted wind speeds were about 24 miles an hour out of the south. And so I figured I'd go on foot and by transit. And I really like that if for two reasons. One, I didn't have to kind of worry about parking all the time and paying for parking and where I was going to park. And I didn't have to worry about where I was going to lock my bike up and unlock it and lock it up all day. Um, and so then it's a matter of logistical planning of like, okay, how can I, with the available shoe leather and time that I have, visit 15 shops and do it? And so I arranged my routes basically to start out with some of the shops that opened early downtown. I started with Exile and Bookville at 8 a.m. on South Michigan Avenue, and then went over to San Myers in Printers Row, and then I got up on the Blue Line and went up into the Belmont stop, and then basically uh, got a few shops up around there, and then walked down the Milwaukee Avenue corridor back to the Loop, which got me about 8 shops within that like 3 mile stretch of walking. Then back through the Loop, and then I made a priority of wrapping my um, tour up with the then existing hometown local indies, and went to Powell's, the original Powell's in Hyde Park, 57th Street Books, and then Seminary Co-op, where I've been a member since
And then
1992.
Ken, I know you weren't doing this just on instinct. There probably was a plan. But before we get to what the purpose of all this
Oh
is, it's
yeah.
fascinating. How did you go from, the local 50 or 80 bookstores or whatever it is to then a national tour, which is what you're on now?
Right. Well, so I had the good fortune of having some plans, both recreational and business travel. And so I sort of thought about like, uh, so while I had actually just prior to the beginning of 2024 visited a couple bookshops in the Portland area, and there's some other ones that I'd probably visited in California, I realized in April of 2024 that I could probably only put together a list that I was confident in, if backdating it to January 1st. So that's when I kind of started. And then I just said, okay, how many do I think I can do? And so it was a little bit oriented towards discovery and not a destination per se. And just kind of to see, I wish I could say that I had a stated goal. I've sort of developed those stated goals. As I'm now in the situation where I think I have a reasonable crack at visiting roughly 10% of the independent bookshops around the country in the U.S. Within a 3-year period by the end of this year. So that has emerged as a kind of goal. Um, but the other piece of it really is just about using it. I mean, it's kind of an overlap between just things that I'm personally passionate about and interested in, and as a hobby, as a side hustle, so to speak. Um, because I do think that, I like going into bookshops much as I like going into books. I feel curious, and as I've said before, I think that that experience is one that is identified with virtues of curiosity and humility both. You know that you don't know something, and you want to find something out. And there's always that sense of epiphany and discovery, or not, unfortunately, not always, but there is often, and that is one of the things. And then the ability to kind of get a little bit of a local flavor of a place, and using the bookshop as a way of getting kind of a perspective on that. So, as Lisa alluded to, I had some travels, so I did get to bookshops in the UK and in Amsterdam and in Iceland. And then later that year in 2024, I had the opportunity to condo sit for my in-laws who live in Waikiki, and so I was able to kind of check off some Hawaii bookshops, which allowed me to get both the southernmost and westernmost independent bookshops in the U.S. In my list. Although I will note that the westernmost has now moved a little further west since I visited it. So it's a little bit of a ship of Theseus problem in that I visited the westernmost bookstore, but not at its westernmost location. So all the more reason to get back to Kauai as if one would need it.
Hey, Ken, so one question off the top of my head would
Yeah.
be, do you see a difference regionally between, since you're one of the few people that's been in so many bookstores around the country, do you see a different kind of a group character to different regions of bookstores?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen that much regional difference. I mean, there might be some difference with regard to urban and versus
Yeah.
or larger metropolitan areas versus kind of smaller towns. As you can see, if you check out the map, my concentration has mostly been east of the Mississippi at this point, about 32 states. Um, and I think some of it has to do a little bit with the overall infrastructure, right? So I can talk about talk story books in it wasn't Hanapepe, Kauai, in Hawaii, and it's a mixed new and used shop. And relative to kind of the overall kind of more kind of rural setting that Kauai offers, it makes a lot of sense, and it has some pretty neat offerings within there. I think I picked up appropriately enough, I picked up Sarah Vowell's Unfamiliar Fishes there, which is kind of a history of the sort of European presence within the Hawaiian Islands. So that felt uh, apt, and that's one of the things I think that I get out of this in terms of like it's almost like a travel theme. Like I'm going to be traveling anyway, and how am I going to add value to the experience? I'm always interested in kind of pressing into something that generates additional interest. And one of the things that is on offer there is often things that you can acquire regionally. Um, from a bookshop that might not be available where I'm at home. And also, insofar as I am wanting to support the local Chicago ecosystem, I try to be careful about not cannibalizing too much of my own sort of wish list of books with things that I could easily get locally. And so, what that usually leads me to look for actually is somebody who's or books by the regional poet laureate of wherever I am for two different reasons. One of which is that poetry markets seem to be fairly localized, and two, if I'm traveling, poetry volumes are small; they're easy to pack. So that often, I did a road trip out east in October and November, 16 days, and I visited about 55 bookshops over that period of time, as far south as Virginia, as far north and east as Maine, and then back through the Midwest and Southern Ontario.
Well, you've got such an interesting perspective because of the breadth of experience that you've encountered. What what are you seeing? Because I know it's more breadth than depth per bookshop. Obviously, if you're spending very little time in the bookshop relatively, you're not learning about their turns and their inventory and their strategies and all their things, but you are getting an impression. Has there been a moment where you thought something important is happening here in bookshops, or
Yeah.
you had, I mean, give us some of your revelationary moments, if I can make a word.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
appreciate the question,
revelation.
and
Yeah.
yes, I should acknowledge and thank you for nodding to that. That in some respects, I'm very much a browser, and I am just kind of dropping in, usually unannounced. I think your shop, Plenty Bookshop, is the first one I think anybody was really expecting me at, knowing what I was doing. But I usually kind of go in unannounced, and I'm not exactly a secret shopper because I usually wind up telling people what I'm up to, which
Yeah.
is largely oriented. But as far as like, going into a place and figuring out, is there something happening? I think that for me, that oftentimes feels most salient in the ones that are kind of community bookshops or a really intentional focus on community or the nonprofit groups. I mean, I think, if I reflect on that question, you know, sometimes it's less about their function within the community as a retail space and more about how they provide a convening location. So I can think about, for instance, like I spent about a week in Omaha for a Barbara Bush Foundation project trying to understand the literacy access landscape there, and had a chance to go to a number of different bookshops there from sort of their and it's interesting because there are different kinds of flavors. But one thing I would mention, like I went to one out in Bellevue, which is on the southern side, I believe, of the Omaha area, called Two Dads in a Bookstore.
Yeah, I
And
know them. Yeah.
yeah, and what struck me there was that what was really seeming to go on was that that seemed to be like a community space for tutoring and mentoring of young people. So it was less about the specific retail, transactional aspects about bookselling. They had pretty robust uh, for their context offering of used books there, but you could also tell that that was going on. Similarly, when I was in Detroit a few weeks ago, or months ago rather, it was November, going to 27th Letter, also had that kind of community vibe. They have a multi-level bookshop, and downstairs they've got this game space, and it's pretty clear that they're oriented to kind of bringing in the community and kind of being a gathering place, and that's been really cool. Um, Sometimes it's hard to kind of pick up on exactly what gets it, but I remember stopping, usually reliably road trip back and forth between Chicago and Chapel Hill for Thanksgiving, and on one trip back from Chapel Hill, stopped into Bookmarks in Winston-Salem,
Hmm.
which is a nonprofit uh, bookshop, and really like the vibe there. Kind of got that sense they had some things that were articulating the mission around supporting literary arts, and also kind of got a sense of the way in which it was kind of nestled there in the downtown neighborhood in Winston-Salem. And again, I acknowledge that I'm often an interloper. I'm very much a tourist, and sometimes I'm really spending no more time than 30 to 90 minutes within a place. So I can't really uh, speak to grabbing the whole vibe, but sometimes there are definite feels that kind of come across, and they're ones that um, feel particularly warm and welcoming, and definitely ones that you feel like something interesting is going on.
So talk about the ones that are warm and welcoming. What can you unpack what it is that made it feel warm, made it feel so?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So again, I recognize that people have lots of different characters and interests and particular tastes when it comes to this. So I'm not trying to universalize from my own, but I'm a person who likes to go into bookshops where you get the sense of abundance, right? And
Mm.
that um, that there's an opportunity for discovery here to find not only the book you were looking for, but the three or four you didn't know you really needed, right? And those kinds of opportunities where sometimes where you feel the magic happens. Um, and I think, and again, you all in this conversation who are running bookshops are far more expert in the considerations around this than I am. I'm coming at it from the opposite, from the sort of the customer constituent piece. I like that abundance, and I feel like sometimes I've occasionally run into like there's a fine line, I think maybe sometimes between abundance and clutter, but usually that relates to the non-book merchandise that's getting sold within bookshops. And I understand about the revenue profiles and the need to monetize floor space, or at least I think I have a sense of that. Um, but if I feel like the browsability is being impeded by non-book stuff, that gets a little in the way. But the warm and welcoming thing too, the other big piece that I really like is the personalized recommendations, right? It's the ability to get the vibe. I can think of off the top of my head like times that I've really liked, either the way that the bookshop has framed the recommendations, so like White Whale in Pittsburgh, right? It says Pod Picks, which is great, right? Punning on the uh, group name for whales, right? Or
Mhm.
um, the novel Neighbor in is it Webster Groves? It's just outside of St. Louis. They have a great I forget how they framed it precisely, but it's not just recommendations or picks, but like these are the favorites of this particular bookseller, and
Mhm.
that works really well from my perspective. There's another bookshop that I have been to, close to half a dozen times in a place where I regularly spend some time. I won't identify where it is, um, and their shelf talkers are all kind of generated generically. There's nothing that seems like it comes directly from the folks in the shop, and I feel like that's a missed opportunity. I feel the where I get the most out of it is where I feel like I'm getting a recommendation that's specific to the people there, and in part because I am in the process kind of crafting memories of the experiences.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you
some of the, like,
Ken,
yeah.
do you have also a take on the stores that you felt the staff was the most eager to help you, but also admired your need for distance too while you look? Or you know what I mean? It's a fascinating the staffing of bookstores and how to engage customers. And Lisa is a bit of an expert at this. Is a fascinating thing for me, and you're this customer that's going all around the country. What's the variety of experiences you've had with people trying to engage you, what you're looking for, and stuff like that?
I appreciate that. Yeah. And Steve, thanks. Anytime you need to interrupt me, because I do have a lot of material to work through. So I appreciate you interposing to ask the question. And yeah, I can appreciate, and that's basically how I respond in the moment. Um, that you know, the booksellers are interacting with their own communities most regularly, and they've established a particular kind of vibe. Usually, what I do is, I kind of go in and I have a few kind of go-tos. I look at the staff recs, I look at the poetry sections. I have a few friends who are poets, one of whom is on this call, who I look for their titles on shelves, um, just as a point of interest. Um, and uh, then eventually I will kind of make my way over to where the booksellers are if they're not out and about within the shelves, and I'll just kind of say, yeah, I'm doing this. I may have already made my selection. Um, but I can appreciate, and I don't judge with regard to like whether or not somebody is kind of effusive or outgoing versus reserved. But like I'll tell you this story. So I was um, and maybe this kind of unfolds it, right? Because this was my travels through New England, right? Part of the country with its own kind of distinctive mores and characters sometimes, and etiquette and manners. And I knew I was starting the day in Boston. I had to get up to Maine, get to New Hampshire. I had come across um, earlier in that same trip a bumper sticker in Baltimore for the book mill in Montague, Massachusetts. It says books you don't need in a place you can't find. It's like, okay, I definitely need to go there. And then I was going to finish the day in North Adams, where a friend of mine lived. And so I knew I was going to go to the first open bookshop on a Monday in Maine. And so I went to one in Agunquit. I'm blanking on the specific name, but I think there is only one bookshop there. And had a lovely chat with the bookseller and what they were doing there. And they offer coffee, and that was super nice. And again, I kind of offer what I'm up to. And I leave there and I go up to um, Manchester. I think it's the Book Rack in Manchester, and um, they have a nice coffee shop there. Good browsable stacks. Nothing that really kind of caught my eye that I didn't already have or know that I needed, but I did chat with the booksellers as I was checking out. I can't remember off the top of my head what I picked up there. And they said, "Oh, you really need to go to Gibson's because Gibson's is the oldest indie in New Hampshire." I'm like, "Okay, I can work that into my itinerary." So again, part of this is being open to kind of serendipity and kind of a yes and kind of spirit, which um, also makes this more fun. And loved Gibson's, huge space. I think that they're the oldest indie in New Hampshire, and I think they've had several different locations and deep stacks. I picked up a work by the current or one of the recent poets laureate from New Hampshire there, and then I told um, the booksellers what I was up to, and they said, "Oh, you need to go to the old number six book depot in Henniker." I'm like, "I think I do." And this place was a barn of wonders. It's on this hillside in this small college town in New Hampshire that I'd never heard of before. And, um, you know, presumably the bookseller there was the owner of the space. It just was this really amazing kind of rustic labyrinth of books, very well curated. I think I picked up a couple of Catherine Lacey titles there, one as a gift and one for myself. Um, and tried to chat up the bookseller, but he was pleasant, but he wasn't having the chatting. So it's like, all right, that's fine. Um, uh, and then they sent me on to, or the folks at Gibson's also said, in addition to the old number six book depot, to go down to Toadstool, either in Keene or Peterborough. I think went to the Peterborough location, and again had a great chat there with, I think Nadia was the name of the bookseller, and she had recently been to Montreal. And so again, part of this is just you doing the trip, having something to talk about, particularly with people who are, really committed to bookshops and to reading and such, is just an opportunity to encounter something uh, novel, both literally and figuratively, all the time. And that piece is really fun.
It
Did you
does
come
seem.
away, one of the things I wanted to ask is, did you come away with a sense of a modern bookstore, because Lisa and I have talked a lot about with people on this call and other people as part of this whole larger group is, tables with displays of books face out and sort of a much more welcoming and intriguing display of books rather than, the tradition of, just a bunch of books by author, listed by author, in fiction and such.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any one formula. I mean, and I want to be respectful too, because I know that, and I'm very excited about some booksellers who are starting up, with these small shops in their very early days, and they're just beginning to build inventory. And I can't really, I mean, I had a bit of a chance to talk with Lisa when I was in Cookeville about the way that Franklin Fixtures partners on sort of initial kind of financial strategy and outfitting the shops. But yeah, I definitely prefer to go into a shop that feels like the stacks are deep and abundant, and there's going to be that kind of surprise and serendipity, and where I feel like it almost feels like it's there's only one or two copies of a particular book. It feels very much display. I understand that a lot of the sort of the younger shops are just kind of in the process of kind of building toward that. Um, the so but it could kind of depend on, I mean, and again, there's no one particular people often ask me what my favorite shop is, and it's like, okay, I've now been to close to 300. It's a little hard to kind of narrow it down, but there are flavors, and I know that within a number of different municipalities, it kind of depends on what I'm looking for. Like if I want to go to um, a shop that has deep, where I know what I want in advance, right? And I want to go to the shop that is most likely to have it. I have a pretty good sense of where to do that in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in DC, um, uh, Baltimore, a few other places maybe, um, Boston, Greater Boston. But if I want something that's kind of niche, or if I want to go something that's really like really nicely curated, where I feel like I'm going to get a bookseller recommendation that's coming to me from somebody with a set of tastes and interests and excitement that kind of maps onto mine. Again, I'm not trying to universalize my experience in terms of like what people um, opt for, but like I know kind of my go-to places, in most of those cities as well, right? Where I'm going to go for the curation, and then the additional piece, like if I know that I'm on the lookout for something that is, telling a story of an underrepresented community, if I can participate in the life of a bookshop that is actively seeking to advocate on behalf of readership, from those voices, then I will do that. Right. That's another way of kind of, I mean, my perspective on this, and I wrote this and maybe at some point I can grab when the seminary co-op in my neighborhood recently had announced their new executive director. I used that as an opportunity to write a letter to the editor for the Hyde Park Herald, the local newspaper. And one of the things that I advocated in there is that, from my perspective, all of these independent bookshops are social enterprises in that, their business is very firmly linked to the overall quality of community life, and that's the piece that really interests me. So. Um, the opportunity to kind of participate in that as I am touring around the various places that my travels take me is also meaningful to me.
Let's dive into that a little bit, the social enterprise piece, because I mean, right now it strikes me that you're still in the middle of this, and what I admire is that you are, or what I think is unique about your journey is you're entering without an agenda, and you're not taking away any. You're not putting frameworks and together about it yet. You're still in the middle of the experience and just letting it flow through and over you. But this bookshops as social enterprise is something you've been thinking about. And as you think about it in this moment, have you seen evidence or or where have you seen, how have you seen evidence of that theory played out or writ larger, the bookshops as social enterprise, as important to communities?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. Thank you, Lisa. I think again, most of the indies that I would go to, from my perspective, seem to have, I know you've got a three-part paradigm, and you have you talk about advocacy, community, and then what's the third?
There's the book centric bookshop, the
You're
one
right, the book
who's
centric,
for
right?
the readers like you who do a lot of reading and who come in and expect to go like I'm in discovery and all that. And then there's the community focus, which is really often focused on building the community and maybe serving people who are not really deep readers primarily.
Right, right.
And then the advocacy bookshop, which is really serving a segment of the population or a particular interest or cause. And at least those are my three
Yeah.
working working buckets. I don't know if you've seen that or if you've seen, and I think each of them has a continuum, but
Yeah, and
um,
that maps on one of the other structures that I'm familiar with is one of the ones that Josh Cook from Porter Square Books introduces in his book, The Art of Liebermancy, which is out of Biblioasis, where he talks about conservative, which I think is just sort of like agnostic as to reader interest and is just there to kind
mhm.
of provide a service, right? Versus progressive, where there's kind of an active curation towards an idea of like these are good books towards a particular definition of good. And then he has kind of radical, within which he groups a number of different ones, including religiously informed, Christian or Buddhist or other shops, but then also shops like Red Emma's or Firestorm or ones, or to a certain extent, Pilsen Community Books in Chicago, right, that have a very active sort of political dimension to them. So I would say, by and large, for the most part, the the indie shops that I visit that are primarily selling new books are kind of largely in that progressive category. And so, in that sense, I think there is a sort of active sense of curating towards community benefit, community interests, and making a positive contribution. So that's one way. I mean, I think another thing that shops do as well that is kind of with that idea towards the benefit is really about picking locations, right? I mean, obviously there's a little bit of or a lot of a sort of kind of financial and operational consideration, but uh, I see this in part as um, how we contribute to livable communities, and I think bookshops are really crucial for that. And one of the things that I really like in terms of accessibility, and again, it kind of involves a lot of factors beyond any one person or one business's control, right? It's just walkability, the quality of community life in downtown areas, accessibility, transit. I think about this, for instance, I can talk about the Omaha example, right? The project that I was out there for was to try to scope out Omaha for a project that would assess literacy access community by community or neighborhood by neighborhood, right? And then try to understand how the various community assets are deployed within that. And I knew going in, for instance, that Omaha had half the population density of Chicago. But when I go to places, I like to kind of be on the street, right? And kind of get a sense of what it's like to move around. And uh, one of the things I realized is that, by and large, for the most part, very few people walking around in Omaha. It's very much car centric, and things are kind of spread out, and that winds up affecting some of it. There's a great little shop that was right by my hotel. It's not too far from the old market district in Omaha called Next Chapter, and I think it's a second generation book owner. She took her parents' operation from somewhere else out in the Midwest, I think in Nebraska, and started a new shop. And it's the new shop that, at least at the time I visited, which was the fall of 2024, um, that's kind of most accessible to the kind of downtown riverfront and old market areas. She's now, I think, having a little bit of a struggle because the city is building a kind of streetcar operation going right up the street by her, and while that ultimately will accrue to her benefit, right now it's keeping all the cars from getting to her shop. And so the last I saw on her socials were some challenges about that.
Hey,
Um,
no,
but
go
that
ahead,
that
Jan.
issue about, oh, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was just gonna say, we have three different questions, but you finish first, and then
No, no,
I'll.
that's fine. Yeah, happy to go with the questions. I mean, but largely speaking, it's just about like I think if the bookshops can be contributing to kind of that healthy aspect of the in person, it's one of the benefits that really accrues in terms of like having the brick and mortar shop is realizing the kind of on the street in-person interactions and the ability to kind of build community that way by being a place that people are going to bump into their neighbors on the way.
Yeah,
And when you say social enterprise, bumping into your neighbors is a piece of that. As yeah.
Yeah, treat them
Um,
like
absolutely.
the real thing.
yeah,
The
there
first question was, what for me, Steve, was what's the biggest surprise you experienced in your quest? What what was the most shocking or fascinating thing that happened?
it's
Oh,
from Eastie. Yeah. Thank you,
yeah. I
Eastie.
mean, in terms of, I don't know, it's been full of really fun surprises, right? As I mentioned, I try to go to, um, and again, it kind of depends what you mean by surprises in terms of its sort of emotional payoff or the level of surprise or the what's been the most informative. But when I was visiting my daughter in Boston back in the fall, I went to check out this bookshop called Narrative, which is a relatively new shop in Somerville, I think. Technically, it's either Somerville or Cambridge, but I think it's Somerville. Um, Again, Boston, paved cow paths, small, anything, all that. But the owner there said, "Oh, you really should just go. You should go check out Just Bookish in the Dorchester neighborhood of South Boston." So next day, I had the opportunity to kind of drive down there with my daughter. We go to Just Bookish, and they've got this nice um, little shop, really well curated collection, and the poetry collection is amazing. And I said to the booksellers there, like, "Oh, right, there is like an immediate, there's a current Boston Poet Laureate, and there's an immediate past Boston Poet Laureate. Both of their surnames begin with O." And one of the booksellers said, "Oh, I can help you with those." And so she walks me over to uh, the shelf and hands me a book by the current poet laureate. And I've taken a look at it. And then she hands me one saying, "This is the former poet laureate. And oh, by the way, that's me."
Yeah.
Portia
That's very sweet.
Olariola, who is actually from the south side of Chicago, right? So we were neighbors at one point, but she is the immediate past poet laureate of Boston. So that was a really happy surprise.
Yeah.
So biggest in terms of like most surprised by it, maybe, yeah. In terms of informative, or for the larger aspect about literacy access, I don't. That's a little harder to pin down. I might have to spend a little more time thinking about that.
Well, here's related to your poetry, your story that's so much poetry. Somebody asked, are you discovering interesting approaches to authors with them helping to create community and audience for books, literary arts in the stores?
That's Christine. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Yeah, so again, acknowledging that I'm usually just kind of a drop-in in most shops other than Chicago. I do spend a fair bit of time regularly in Western North Carolina, and also in DC and Boston where my kids live. So I get a little bit of sense of that. But like, and I can kind of pay attention on the socials to the author events. I mean, I really love a couple things that Exile and Bookville, do in Chicago. They will bring in authors as uh, shopping helpers in the holiday season.
Ah,
So
nice.
Rebecca Mackay, right, has helped select books that I've given as gifts to my um, family members, right? That's super fun. They also have shelf talkers using local authors recommending other works, right? And that sort of way leading on to way thing is just terrific, right? Like, um, very happy. I think it was Sarah Levine. I read her book Treasure Island! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Which was just a marvel. I'm getting ready to read her book The Hitch pretty soon, I hope. But I think she recommended some similar things that were on Shelf Talkers at Exile. So that is, I think, one really great area of author engagement. Um, Obviously, the ability to attend author events is a welcome one, and I'm in a really rich, location for that, right? So I'll mention though, one of the, again, speaking back to I could think about the half dozen or so bookshops that I visited when I was in Omaha for a week, where I was just kind of using that sense of like, how is the the bookshop, I think the biggest shop that's there that kind of from my recollection. Like I really like the small, like downtownish next chapter, but then um, y- you know, Omaha just keeps going west from the river, and so the largest shop is the Bookworm out there, in my experience, right? And one of the things that I remember the bookseller saying there was that it's a little frustrating from their location in Omaha is a little frustrating because it is in some respects, and her words, not mine, flyover country, and hard to bring authors in. I was curious about that in some other places that I visited, but it's that doesn't seem to be an issue in places like Memphis or St. Louis or Oxford, right? Obviously, some really good anchor shops there that are able to get author events and engagements. But in terms of the creativity, like I love the shelf talkers where it's, in fact, the author that you like recommending other things that are inspiring to them. And if you have the opportunity to involve authors doing hand selling within a shop for a particular season, that's particularly
You
great.
know, Ken, we have
We,
one of our interviewees about a year ago is a guy named Floyd in Libraria, which is in East London. This is an amazing shop, and he devotes a shelf or two to a different author each month, but it's that author picks the books that are there. It's his recommendations that are on the shelf, and it's clearly labeled as, and there are a lot of famous authors that take advantage of it.
I
Um,
like that, Steve, and I love that. I mean, we have 8 different authors that serve in that capacity at Plenty, so
wow.
that is a thing that happens. One that's on staff as a paid person, the others come in as volunteers. Evan Karp has a question too, which is that all stores are different, but he was asking if you see anything that has alarmed you, in terms of missed opportunities or just no-brainer advice that you would give to bookshops based on what you've seen. But I like
Yeah,
the question. Thanks,
thanks
Evan.
for the question, Evan. I was doing the Minneapolis book crawl in the week leading up to Independent Bookstore Day because they do a multi-day crawl, and I stopped into Inkwell Booksellers. I think it's technically in Minneapolis, not St. Paul. Um, and one of the booksellers there is like, "Have you ever been to a bookshop you hated?" And I'm like, "No, hate's a strong word. Like, I wouldn't go there. I mean, I definitely have been to bookshops that I felt were not curated towards my interests, and I don't begrudge that. It's just, obviously they're uh, either trying to find a niche or they're catering to a community interest. Um, I did, I think there's only one time that I've felt that a bookstore was unwelcoming, and this was a used bookshop. And I allude to this in one of my blog posts in the We're Witchy blog that I linked to up in the chat. Um, but that had a kind of uh, chalkboard outside with a kind of this derogatory or derisive definition of the term woke, which was, I think, trying to establish a particular sort of antagonism towards that concept. And it's like, that just kind of feels a little bit off for me from the perspective of, again, not being particularly political or partisan about it, but I think of uh, bookshops as a place of discovery and welcome. So that is very much the exception and very much not the rule. And was one thing I would say that I've been to a couple shops where I've usually most shops for me are pretty easily intelligible. I'm familiar enough with how things work that I know how to navigate them, and I don't get too confused about how to find my way around. There've been a couple exceptions. Sometimes, like I've been to a couple of used shops. Like there's one in Baltimore that I went to where I think it's curated by like 3 people who run this shop, and I choose to say that its shelves are optimized for serendipity. Put it that way. Like you're just gonna is if you turn loose the idea of like knowing like what the order might be, then you're gonna discover some stuff.
Well, hey, Ken, so
Yeah,
that's a really good point because serendipity can feed browsing and discovery,
yeah.
or it can just lead to frustration. And so, one of the techniques that James Daunt in England developed with his own bookstore, which a lot of people are using now, is tables with a whole scattering of books. They're fiction, nonfiction, but there's something about the covers that is like a theme, just a color even. And
Hmm.
so it both attracts you with seductive covers, but also there's just constant discovery of, wait a minute, I didn't come here to find a novel, but I wonder
Yeah.
if I should read it. Yeah. And what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, the paradigmatic thing for with the seminary co-op being the one that I've had the longest lifelong relationship with is the front table there, right? And it definitely has that. And obviously, it's a very academically oriented indie in the University of Chicago community. Um, I like that, right? I was in Brevard, North Carolina, right before I went to see Lisa in Cookeville, and Highland Books there has this really great, if you like this, you might want to try this. Like that was a good one, right? I went to Park Road Books in Charlotte back in June, and they had a um, kind of this interesting kind of fiction nonfiction pairing, which was really interesting, right? Like they could put the new Jim Crow right next to Chain Gang All Stars, right? And that that made sense to me, right? With regard to linking those two things. Um, what was so yeah, those things work, and I do think that yeah, optimizing for and your example that you're laying out, Steve, is like using those display spaces differently than the shelves per se, right? If you're thinking of like stacks versus, an opportunity to kind of curate those, that's really an opportunity. And certainly it's going to be the case that if you've got like a group of uh, staff recommendations kind of group, that's also going to do a little bit of fostering the serendipity. Um,
It's
there was one
interesting.
other,
It's interesting
yeah.
what you said about the bookstore that was leading you from one book to another, because that strikes me as really ideal and interesting. Like
Yeah.
the library again, and or even what is it, Cleo's in Oakland, which is an amazing store. They're using themes to organize their books. So,
Mhm.
or in the case of Cleo's, it's an era. You should go there when you're on the West Coast. It's an amazing bookstore. It's hugely community. It's just mobbed by people,
Yeah.
um, but
I w
the bookstores are all the books are all organized by kind of era and not by when they were published and not by author or anything like that.
yeah, and really interesting. I would mention one other answer that I have to Evan's question, in terms of like things that I found, a little bit of obstacles to my style of browsing, I guess. Couple bookshops in the Midwest, and actually they have a relationship in that the bookshop owner at one shop trained at the other shop, but it was a strange one for me because I went in and I found that there was this kind of very fine parsing of the fiction section, so that there was like literary fiction, popular fiction, historical fiction, and while I understand that the publishing industry provides those kind of tags, right? And so they were kind of just using those. For me, it was hard for me to kind of anticipate um, where I should go look for the particular book I was trying to find. So again, I'm not the same person every time I go into a bookshop, and so sometimes I'm ready for the serendipity. I remember, again, back to my Omaha experience, going into one of the installments of the Book Nook, which I think is a small black-owned shop in the Omaha area, and I think they've got a couple. And I went to the Oxurban location, which is Nebraska backwards for those of you who are trying to figure out where that word comes from. But then as soon as I realized that, oh, these shelves aren't alphabetized at all, then I could kind of turn loose and like, okay, I can just scan them without having to look. And so it was a matter of resetting my expectations. But I did wonder, like with those two shops that I was talking about um, the extent. I think I was probably looking for the first book in the on the calculation of volume by Salva Baia, and whether or not that's going to be a literary fiction, popular fiction, um, or science fiction, can be a little bit of a trick, and there is a little bit of separation there. And I know that obviously I'm a little bit less concerned about people pulling out science fiction and fantasy or pulling out romance or romantasy or that sort of thing than that literary versus popular versus historical. That one gets me, and that's maybe just me.
Well, so as something of an outsider who works a little bit on the publishing side, I've always been struck by what I call the Dewey Decimal System of bookstores, where they organize by traditional categories and stuff, which I think completely breaks down browsing. Because it's designed in a sense, it's like Amazon without the algorithm. It's designed so you can go and find the book you want immediately, which is not what bookstores are about. They're about community and about sharing and discovery at their best. Um, just to get on the soapbox for a minute.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean,
It's an experience. Yeah.
yeah, one example I have from the library world, just really, University of Chicago, maybe 20 years ago plus, was trying to figure out most academic university libraries were outsourcing a lot of their collection to offsite warehouses and doing a lot in terms of like just basically retrieval systems that involved suburban storage facilities. And the University of Chicago faculty was really dedicated to preserving the browsability of the stacks as much as they could. And so part of their solution was that they created this immense kind of actually underground library on site with a robotic retrieval system and allocated to that space the stuff where browsability wasn't an issue, right? So these would be journals and serials and stuff where you were looking for a specific edition or a number, so that they could preserve as much as possible within the regular stacks of the library the ability, again, and this is, I think, a value proposition for a lot of libraries in addition to bookshops, is like not only find the book that you're looking for, but the books around it that you didn't know you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting toward the end of our time, and I'm wanting to ask a couple of personal questions, for you to kind of step back. And have these travels, or in what ways have these travels impacted your relationship to reading or bookstores or bookshops so far? Have you
Well,
or have you been changed by this? I mean, most of us don't go into a book and exit a book the same way. I'm imagining the same could be said of a bookstore or bookshop.
yeah. I mean, it's great for me, Lisa, because and again, usually, I mean, I don't get a book at every shop that I go to, but I get one at most, and it's a helpful kind of anchor point for the memory, and particularly if I've had kind of it feels very enriching in that perspective. And again, I think in part, um, trying to go with some sort of like regional affinity between the book I'm acquiring, right? And it's not always the case that I'm going for a poet laureate. Sometimes it's a book that feels kind of representative of the space, right? Or the time that I had there. Those feel like they add value, and it, I think, ultimately feels like it increases my learning in ways that the book alone or the bookshop alone wouldn't do. So that the pairing works out pretty well. That's one of the reasons why I created the Wirrawidgee blog the way that I did, which Wirrawidgee is just, I invented it. I think that what I read and where I got it. And part of the premise of that is kind of looking for the connection between the book and the bookshop, right? So the most recent post that I did was a book called The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols, which is kind of a critical review of the book, but it was allied to East City Bookshop, which is on Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, basically within sight of the Capitol building, and
Right.
thinking about how that bookshop has this kind of public affairs section right at the front. You come in off the street, right? And that's kind of in terms of thinking about, I know, Lisa, you're very thoughtful about this at Plenty, about how you engross the person entering the shop in a kind of narrative or an arc of experience. They can come in for the book that they are interested in, right? And then you can descend downstairs, right there in the basement level, and they've got this really enormous fiction section, enormous kids section. I don't spend a whole lot of time on kids books sections. Um, but that is, I think, to me, kind of this kind of fitting way of thinking about sort of uh, the book and where you got it and how those partnerships or those
We
adjacencies.
we need to find a way to share your list of the books that represent the special stores you've gone to around the country.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's your blog or what, but you what resources do you have so we can do it? We follow up always, with the video and the transcript, so we could add that to it.
It definitely
Yeah,
sounds like the blog needs to be a connection.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I wish my previous blog had the word Monday in the title, which kept me on deadline, which was really good. And I haven't had that, and I have an enormous backlog. Like I would love to talk about. This kind of gets back to the question of the biggest surprise. Like I went into the Source booksellers in Detroit, a nonfiction black-owned bookstore in Detroit, and had the opportunity to get introduced to Miss Janet, who is, I'm told, a legend. Recently, I believe, chatted with LeVar Burton at the Winter Institute.
I think I told you that. Yeah. Yeah,
And
she's wonderful.
yeah, and uh, I think one of the other booksellers, it might have been her daughter, introduced me to her, and I was kind of explaining what I did, and there was an interviewer there who was saying, is this part of your job? And I was trying to explain, like, I'm in a bit of a kind of professional transition. And Ms. Janet looked at me, and was like, no, I think this is your work.
I love
That
that.
might be the most special moment I've had in this journey. I mean, it's really amazing.
Hey, Kim, can you
Really
put
grateful
your
to her.
can you put the a link URL to your blog
It's in
in
the
the
top of the chat. If people scroll up,
oh, okay,
it's
the
Yeah.
very
yeah.
top.
So
Okay,
it's right
we'll
below the
share.
map. So
Oh, I see.
the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
link I
Yeah.
posted
yeah.
is the map as it currently stands as of a few weeks ago in my visit to St. Louis and downstate Illinois, and then
And
the
then the
blog is there.
Where Wiggy blog. Yeah.
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 Okay.
And you can easily click on that and your map and follow your map. And I think you have followers on well on Facebook, or you have a Facebook group that's kind of following your journey.
I haven't done a Facebook. I just with my Facebook friends, I set up a hashtag, which
Gotcha.
sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes
Yeah.
Facebook is kind of fickle on that, but I just hashtag global indie book crawl
Yeah.
is what I called it. And
And
I'm, so I've got 18 more states to cover in the U.S. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to happen. There's some aspirational ones that I'd like to get to abroad every once in a while.
Yeah.
uh,
Sarah is asking, how do I see the map and URL for the blog? Yeah.
all the way at the top. It's all the
All the
way at
way.
the top, Sarah.
Yeah, and I
Just
shared it
scroll
again
up.
too.
Yeah, there we go. And
Yeah.
Steve's shared it again. So we've got a lot to follow. I love
Oh,
it's
wait, Lisa, I have one
uh,
question.
yeah,
Yeah, how in the world do you remember all this? You have the most amazing memory.
yeah, yeah,
Well, it helps to have these anchors. Like, and one of the things I think that's really magical about is, particularly if, I'm able to lean in and have a personal conversation. But I track, I have a couple different Google Docs that I maintain to kind of keep track of stuff. Documenting on Facebook. I've now started with the blog, um, to do that. And yeah, I mean, it's just, I'm not sure. I mean, it's
yeah.
like we were in Tulsa the other week and went to Magic City, which is a really cool shop, and my wife bought me a little pin that said uh, "Drink coffee, buy books, repeat." And
Yes.
I think it is the coffee drinking and the buying of the books that helps me, keep it. So some things kind of
Okay.
fade away in memory, but if you take a shot from that list and ask me about it, I can probably recreate most of the kind of vibe I picked up when I was there.
That's
So
amazing.
when you complete this journey in any way that you call it complete, or maybe it's never complete, pause in this journey. Is there a place where you're going to gather your thoughts and have an offering, or are you gonna stay in this state of exploration and kind of see what comes out of what's in the future for
Yeah,
you?
that's a really good question. And I sort of think of the blog as that space where it's kind of a sandbox to kind of figure that out. I mean, I have tremendous respect for like Evan Friss and for Danny Kane and some of these other folks, Shar Adams, right, who have kind of done the deep dives and have done the interview pieces. I have not done that. Mine have been, mile wide, inch deep, very kind of glancing encounters. And so I want to be respectful of that. But I'm just kind of using this right now, I think, to kind of gather material. And, ultimately, I don't know, this feels to me what kind of fun feels like, right? So that part, again, it's I crave input, as you know, right? I like that. I like to learn, right? I'm always looking really for novelty, right? So novels and novelty. So some of this, and again, there have been times when I've kind of felt a little bit like, oh, do I still have gas for this, or how can I continue to add some kind of edge that keeps this interesting for me? And I think I'm still there. I if I can develop the writing project of the blog to kind of do that, if I can figure out a way to, I would love to, at some point to like maybe if Amtrak would sponsor me, I can cover those 18 Western state or most of those 18 Western states, right? Get a sleeper car and write about my experience and stop in these southern and southwestern and western states to check out their local indie book scenes.
That sounds like a good thing on your to-do list. And
Yeah.
wow, we are out of time and coming to the close. Ken, want to just thank you for uh, taking us on this journey with you and for giving us the map and the opportunity to follow through in the blog um, and just for being on the journey and picking bookshops as your area of focus. We really appreciate it. Lots of applause all the way in, and thank you everyone for your participation and support of this and the way that that you continue to support these meaningful conversations with innovators and people who are going beyond bookstores in their work. So thank
Yeah.
you.
See you next
No,
time.